Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. I built a lake with my own hands, engineered it, named it, cared for it. Then one day, a smug HOA security guard told me I wasn't allowed to set foot near it. That's when I realized they didn't just want my water, they wanted to rewrite who owned the land beneath it. I never thought I'd be told I couldn't walk to the lake I built with my own hands. But that's exactly what happened on a Thursday afternoon, standing at the Southern Trail I carved nearly a decade ago, staring at a smug security guard in a golf cart and a shiny new aluminum sign that read, "Private Lake. HOA members only. Trespassers will be prosecuted." I just stood there, blinking in the Georgia heat, holding a pair of bolt cutters and a 5-gallon bucket of trout feed, like some trespassing lunatic on his own land. Let me back up. My name's Ronald Jarrett. I'm 49, technically retired, though I've probably worked harder in retirement than I ever did in 20 years at the U.S. Geological Survey. After I left the agency, I bought a hunk of rough terrain near Oconee National Forest, 142 acres of ravines, red clay, and an ice-cold spring that trickled down into a slow, muddy creek. The land was cheap, mostly because nobody wanted to deal with erosion, runoff, or the snake problem. I saw potential. It took 4 years of paperwork, permits, and enough dirt moving to give my back permanent opinions about everything. But I did it. I built a lake, a real one, engineered dam, emergency spillway, energy dissipating baffles, fish ladders, and all. Cost me just shy of $600,000, not counting the sweat equity. It was mine. The lake, the dam, the shoreline, the old trail around the ridge, all of it legally deeded, surveyed, and recorded in the county office in Milledgeville. I'd even named it Jarrett Lake, though nobody besides me and the occasional biologist ever used that name. For a while, it was quiet, peaceful. I'd fish in the mornings, do water quality checks after lunch, and spend evenings watching great blue herons pick off juvenile bass from the shallows. Then, 5 years ago, trouble moved in on the southwestern ridge, Lake Vista Heights. Some bright-eyed developer bought the adjacent tract and started building what he called lake access executive homes. At first, I didn't mind. They were far enough from the dam, and the guy came to me in person, offered a limited shoreline agreement so his lots could technically face water. I agreed, under one condition: no permanent easements, no ownership claims, and no right of use that extended beyond scenic value. He signed, I signed, a notary signed. End of story. Or so I thought. Developers come and go. HOA boards, on the other hand, are like hydras. You cut off one sprout in its place, both more entitled than the last. Somewhere in the shuffle, my agreement with the original builder must have vanished into a desk drawer, or more likely, a shredder. Because now, 8 years after the lake was born, I was being told, by a 20-something guard in a $9 polo shirt, that I wasn't allowed to access it, not from that side at least. "I'm going to have to ask you to turn around, sir," he said. He had aviator sunglasses, clean-shaven arms, and the kind of biceps that come from lifting nothing heavier than a clipboard. "I built this trail," I told him. "Still," he replied, tapping his little touch screen. "HOA jurisdiction starts at that cedar post back there. Access is restricted to members. Non-members must apply for temporary permits." Permits? I actually laughed. "Son, this water is on my land. That shoreline? That's mine. That dam you can barely see through the trees? Also mine. I don't need a permit to walk on my own damn dirt." He squinted. "We've had issues with people claiming they own parts of the lake. The HOA legal team says water is a public trust asset under Georgia code only if it's naturally navigable." I shot back. "This isn't Lake Lanier. It's a closed reservoir, engineered, sealed, regulated, and environmentally certified. You're looking at the guy who built it." There was a pause. I could almost hear the processor in his brain struggling to shift gears. "I'll have to escalate this to the HOA president," he said, suddenly less confident. "Be my guest," I said, tossing the bucket of fish food into the brush and starting back toward my truck. "And tell her, next time she wants to put up a sign on private land, she better bring a damn surveyor and a court order." I drove the long way home, around the ridge, and down the gravel switchback that leads to the main gate I installed next to the NA. Damn. It was late afternoon, cicadas in full swing. As I crossed the spillway walkway and looked out across the lake, something in me shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't just annoyed, I was angry. Not the yelling kind, the calculated kind. The kind that sharpens itself against legal documents and blueprints. These people, these homeowners, didn't even know what they were standing on. They thought they were looking at a natural lake, a gift from God, or the state of Georgia. They didn't realize it was held together by a concrete core wall and 1,000 man-hours, every inch of which I paid for, regulated, and maintained. And now, somehow, they were telling me I wasn't welcome. That night, I went into the garage, unlocked the fireproof cabinet, and pulled out the thick folder labeled Lake Jarrett, Original Plans and Ownership. There it was. Every permit, every receipt, every inspection certificate. I ran my fingers over the engineering diagrams. I'd been quiet long enough. If they wanted to claim the lake, they'd better be prepared to live without it. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail that managed to be both hilarious and infuriating. It came in a glossy envelope with gold embossing across the top. Lake Vista Heights Homeowners Association, Office of Community Standards Enforcement. That was already rich. The letter inside was a masterpiece of corporate overreach, complete with bullet points, bold red text, and phrases like unauthorized presence in designated HOA zones and failure to comply with community guidelines regarding lake access. Inform me that my continued intrusion onto HOA-regulated grounds could result in fines, legal action, and, get this, suspension of community privileges. I read it 3 times. The first time, to believe it. The second, to get mad. And the third, just to laugh. Community privileges? I wasn't even part of their precious little homeowner clique. I lived on land that had been in private hands for over a century. I had timber rights, mineral rights, water rights. Meanwhile, the only thing they had was a bunch of overpriced stucco boxes stacked shoulder to shoulder like teeth in a too small mouth. I drove straight to the HOA office. It was a converted model home at the edge of their development, complete with a tiny fake mailbox out front and a manicured lawn that looked like it had been threatened into submission. Inside, it smelled like potpourri and artificial lemon. A girl in her early 20s sat at the reception desk, pecking at her phone. "I need to speak to someone about this," I said, dropping the letter on the counter. She blinked, picked it up, then smiled like I was a particularly slow golden retriever. "Okay, Mr. Jarrett. Ronald Jarrett." "One moment," she said, vanishing through a side door. A few minutes later, a woman appeared. Late 30s, sharp pantsuit, tighter smile. She moved like someone who filed complaints for fun. "Mr. Jarrett," she said, offering a handshake she didn't mean. "I'm Leslie Marshall, president of the HOA board." "Great," I said. "Let's talk about this letter before someone embarrasses themselves in court." Her smile never wavered. "We're simply enforcing community rules. Lake Vista Heights is a private community with collective responsibility for shared resources, including the lakefront." "Except the lakefront isn't yours," I said. "None of it is. Not the water, not the shoreline, not the trail. It's mine. I have the land deeds, the permits, and every damn contour line on the USGS topo maps to prove it." She blinked. "I think you're misinformed. Our legal counsel has advised that the lake qualifies as a community amenity, and under Georgia water law—" "Save it," I said. "This lake didn't qualify as anything until I dug it out of the mud. It didn't exist before I spent 4 years turning this property into a managed hydrological system. It's an engineered reservoir. I control the inflow, the outflow, and every drop in between." "That may be," she said, her tone tightening, "but you're still in violation of our access protocols. Entering the trail system without permission, approaching the shoreline in view of member homes. In view of—" I cut myself off before the sarcasm boiled over. "You're telling me I can't be seen on my own lake?" She shrugged, still performing. "It causes concern among residents." "Well, here's my concern," I said. "You've posted signs on my property, blocked a trail I built and maintain, and now you're sending threatening letters. That's trespassing, obstruction, and defamation. You want to escalate? We can escalate." Her smile faltered just slightly. "Let's keep this civil." I leaned in. "Lady, you've already started a war. You just don't know it yet." I left without shaking her hand. Back home, I checked the game cameras I had installed a few years back. Trail cams, originally meant for coyotes and trespassers. Turns out they were now picking up HOA security guards strolling up and down my ridgeline like it was public parkland. One of them even dropped a candy wrapper. I cataloged the footage, time-stamped it, and backed it up to the cloud. Later that week, I got an email from a guy named Grant Dorsey, who identified himself as head of external relations for the HOA. Apparently, that meant he sent passive-aggressive emails with big words. He tried to clarify the HOA's position that water resources are subject to collective community stewardship and that exclusive ownership claims ran counter to the HOA's interpretation of state conservation guidelines. It was legal gibberish, recycled nonsense from a real estate seminar or a Facebook group for bored Karens with boundary issues. I responded once. I sent him a scan of my land survey, my dam construction permit, and a polite request to remove all signage and barriers within 72 hours or face legal action for boundary violations. No reply. 3 days later, I found a new sign. Larger, glossier, nailed to a pine tree near the ridge. Trespassing on HOA land is a crime. Non-members will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. That was the moment I realized they really didn't know. They didn't understand that the lake wasn't a gift from God or the state. It wasn't something their developer had discovered or enhanced. It was mine, fabricated, managed, legally bound, and documented. They weren't just wrong, they were ignorant on a level that bordered on parody, and maybe it was time I reminded them. I didn't call a lawyer, not yet. That would have been too easy for them to spin. Grumpy old man sues community, or whatever headline their little newsletter would run with next to recipes for bean salad and articles about how to report your neighbor for loud wind chimes. No, I wanted something cleaner, sharper, something they'd feel in their bones before they even had the vocabulary to explain it. So I walked down to the dam that Saturday morning with a cup of black coffee, a pair of gloves, and the kind of calm you get when you know you're absolutely, undeniably right. The dam had 2 outlets, a standard primary pipe controlled by a sluice gate, and an auxiliary emergency spillway set to release if the water ever rose above safe levels. I'd installed both under regulation with regular inspections. What most people didn't know, especially not HOA presidents, was that I also had a bypass mechanism. Not illegal, not hidden, just never used. Until now. It took me about 10 minutes to crank the gate wheel open. I could feel the pressure shift before I even heard the gurgling, that deep subterranean rush as water began to leave the reservoir through channels it hadn't touched in years. I stood back and watched the lake level start to recede, inch by slow inch. The process was subtle at first, barely noticeable to anyone who didn't measure water height for a living. But by that evening, it was no longer subtle. By Sunday morning, Jarrett Lake had dropped over 4 feet. Boat ramps that had once met water now hovered above cracked mud. The HOA's prized fishing docks hung limp and slanted like someone had yanked the plug on a suburban bathtub. The imported reeds they'd planted along the bank browned under direct sun, and the private lake signs, they now pointed toward a receding shoreline they didn't own. I made sure to document everything. Drone footage, daily measurements, a fresh post on my website with the headline, "Lowering Water Levels for Scheduled Maintenance, Property Owner Notice." That last part was underlined 3 times. Property, owner. By Monday, the real noise began. My phone lit up with 3 voicemails from an unknown number, all from the HOA office. I didn't answer. Instead, I checked the Lake Vista Heights Facebook page, which I'd monitored for years under a fake profile named Carl. Carl liked fishing and grilling and was a proud member of the community. Carl also now had a front row seat to a meltdown. Has anyone noticed the lake is disappearing? Why is my dock on land? My kids were going to swim this weekend. What the hell is happening? Is this related to the creepy guy in the truck near the dam? One post in particular stood out. It was from Leslie herself. A photo of the shrinking shoreline and a caption that read, "Unfortunately, our lake is being deliberately tampered with. We are working with environmental authorities to address this sabotage." Sabotage. That was rich. But then things turned delicious. The next day, I got a call from a journalist with the Oconee Ledger. Apparently, the HOA had tipped them off, trying to stir up a public outcry. "Would you like to give your side of the story?" she asked. "Oh, I'd love to." We met the next morning at my workshop, right next to the dam. I had the table ready, laminated maps, color-coded surveys, stamped permits, and a folder with every state and federal approval from the time I broke ground. I even brewed a pot of coffee and made sure the view through the window perfectly framed the half-empty lake. She asked questions. I answered calmly, clearly, with the precision of a man who spent his life reading water tables. I explained that Jarrett Lake was a private reservoir, maintained voluntarily, monitored regularly, and that I was within full legal rights to adjust its levels for maintenance, sediment control, and shoreline stabilization. She took notes, snapped photos. Her eyes widened a little when she saw the original contract between me and the developer of Lake Vista Heights, especially the clause that said access to shoreline may be revoked at any time by property owner without notice, in bold. That afternoon, the article dropped. Private lake owner pushes back against HOA overreach, water rights dispute in Lake Vista. It was respectful, factual, and devastating for the HOA. By the next morning, my inbox had exploded. Most were angry messages from HOA members who just learned that the lake wasn't theirs to begin with. A few were apologies, some were just confused, but one email stood out. It was from a man named Dan Mathers, apparently one of the original residents. He wrote, "I never knew the lake was yours. They told us it was part of the HOA when we bought in. I'm sorry they're coming at you like this. If you ever want someone to speak at a board meeting, I'm in your corner." I didn't reply right away. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I was standing out at the dam again, watching the afternoon sun bounce off the exposed lake bed. I felt no joy in the disruption, no smugness, just focus. The point wasn't to ruin anyone's weekend. It was to remind them where the water came from and who controlled whether it stayed. The envelope arrived on a Wednesday, hand-delivered by a guy in khakis who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He gave me a sheepish nod, handed over the manila packet, and muttered something about just doing his job. I didn't blame him. He was the messenger. The bullet, however, had HOA legal committee stamped across the back. Inside were 30 pages of inflated nonsense wrapped in legal formatting. Lake Vista Heights Homeowners Association versus Ronald Jarrett. Their demands were bold, absurd, and almost admirable in their stupidity. They wanted the court to declare Jarrett Lake a community access natural resource, to force me to return water levels to their historic state, and, the kicker, pay $125,000 in damages for loss of recreational amenity, emotional distress among residents, and damage to neighborhood prestige. Damage to prestige. I read that line 3 times. Then I set the folder down, poured a whiskey, and went to my shop to sharpen a chisel. Not because I needed to, just because it calms me down, and I was already imagining the look on their faces when this blew up in their HOA-smoothed hands. The next morning, I called Stephanie Donovan, my attorney. We'd worked together before when a timber company tried to edge onto my western tree line. She was one of those no-nonsense women who didn't blink, didn't bluff, and didn't bill by the hour unless it was worth it. "Let me guess," she said before I could even say hello. "You're being sued by a homeowners association that doesn't understand property law." Bullseye. Send me the papers. I'll tear them up. I drove into town that afternoon and dropped off the file at her office. While she reviewed it, I waited at the diner across the street, nursing bad coffee and overhearing a table of realtors complain about how the HOA wasn't what it used to be. I smirked quietly. An hour later, Stephanie texted me, "Come back. Bring every document you've got, and the damn permits. Especially those." I arrived with my whole archive in 2 banker boxes, aerial surveys, environmental reports, the contract with the original developer, the construction receipts, and my favorite, a panoramic photo of the ravine from the year before I started. Excavation showing nothing but dry clay and pine stumps. Stephanie spread everything across her desk like a prosecutor preparing for a slam dunk. "Ronald," she said, "this is one of the most airtight land use cases I've ever seen. Their arguments based on 2 things, collective access and presumed natural status. Both are garbage." I nodded. "I figured. But," she added, "we're not just going to win. We're going to educate. I'm filing a response with full exhibits, permits, surveys, and the shoreline contract. I want this to be humiliating." A week later, we were in court. It wasn't a full-blown trial, just a preliminary hearing for injunctive relief. Their side was trying to get a temporary order to force me to restore the water level until the full case could be heard. They brought in a lawyer with too much gel in his hair and a briefcase that probably cost more than my boat. He opened with a passionate plea about community harmony, historical access, and the ecological consequences of unilateral control. He referred to the lake as a gift of nature that had become part of the HOA's identity. Stephanie stood up, unrolled a 30-inch land survey onto the table, and said, "Your Honor, this lake didn't exist in any natural form until my client used his own funds to create it. I have engineering plans, state permits, and this." She held up the shoreline contract, which explicitly states the HOA's developer agreed to revocable, non-permanent view access. That agreement was with my client, not this HOA, and not its board. She turned to the judge. "This is not a dispute over a shared resource. This is an attempted land grab." Their attorney stammered. But the residents believe." The judge cut him off. "Belief is not ownership. Show me the deed." There wasn't one. The court denied their injunction and ordered that all misleading signage, barriers, or statements implying HOA jurisdiction over Jarrett Lake be removed pending resolution. The look on Leslie Marshall's face as the words were read into the record was worth every ounce of stress. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just turned, picked up my folder, and walked out with Stephanie behind me like a general leaving a conquered battlefield. Outside the courthouse, I saw a handful of Lake Vista residents standing awkwardly by the steps. Most looked confused, some embarrassed. One woman even mouthed sorry as I passed, but I didn't stop. Back home, I took the long walk around the now shrunken shoreline. The cracked earth was finally starting to dry, revealing dock posts that no longer touched water and a faded "Welcome to Lake Vista" sign half sunken in the mud. I paused near the South Ridge, where the first confrontation had happened. The tree where they'd nailed their sign was bare now, just a clean scar on the bark where the metal had been. I stood there for a while, listening to the wind move through the pines, and thought, they wanted a lake they didn't own. Now they have a mud hole they can't explain. After the hearing, things went quiet for about 4 days. That's usually how long it takes for someone like Leslie to regroup. I imagined her in a kitchen full of beige granite, furiously typing another passive-aggressive community bulletin while microwaving leftover risotto. I'd won in court, but I knew better than to think this war was over. HOAs don't lose. They stall. They rebrand. And when all else fails, they dig. So I decided to dig first. Not metaphorically. Literally. I put on my boots, grabbed a rake, and started walking the perimeter of the lake, clipboard in hand. I wasn't just admiring the exposed shoreline. I was taking notes. Because when a body of water drops 4 feet, it doesn't just reveal mud and garbage. It reveals everything people hoped would stay underwater. I started with the south drainage line near the HOA's lots. That stretch had always bothered me. The soil there drained oddly fast, even before the lake receded. Sure enough, with the water gone, I found it. A 4-inch PVC pipe, half submerged, angled toward the lake. Buried under gravel, no filter, no outlet permit. And it wasn't alone. 2 more pipes, both emerging from the direction of the HOA's landscaping zones, were dripping brownish runoff straight into my reservoir. One had a faint chemical smell. Another had clumps of blue fertilizer sludge pooled around the opening. I ran a field test strip through the trickle. Nitrate levels off the charts. Lawn treatments. Pesticides. All of it washing directly into Jarrett Lake, my lake, through unapproved drainage lines. They hadn't just trespassed. They'd been poisoning the ecosystem I spent nearly a decade cultivating. The next day, I contacted the Georgia Environmental Protection Division, submitted a complaint, and provided photographic evidence. They promised an inspection within 72 hours. I didn't stop there. I requested public planning records from the county office regarding the original Lake Vista Heights site plan. It took a few calls, but when I finally got the drainage diagrams, I nearly laughed. The HOA was not approved for direct runoff into adjacent bodies of water. They were required to install filtration berms and retention basins. Neither existed. That weekend, the inspectors arrived. 3 of them, with clipboards, cameras, and one guy who didn't speak much but sniffed every pipe like a bloodhound. They walked the shoreline with me, documenting each illegal outlet. The guy in the windbreaker said it plainly. This isn't runoff. This is unmanaged discharge into a private water body. That's a problem. On Monday, I got the update. $85,000 in fines, plus an order to cease all drainage activity into Jarrett Lake until a full remediation plan was approved and implemented. I wasn't allowed to celebrate, but I did find myself humming while feeding the trout in my secondary pond. Then came the kicker. Stephanie called and told me the environmental notice triggered a secondary clause in my shoreline agreement with the original developer. Any environmental violation related to the HOA's shoreline access immediately nullifies their original view. Easement, meaning the HOA had not only lost access, they'd now violated the terms so badly that any legal claim to shoreline proximity was void permanently. I drove to the county records office the next day and filed a revocation notice. Took all of 15 minutes. Back at home, I posted 2 new signs on the dam and main trail. No trespassing. This lake is a private engineered reservoir. Trespassing is a federal offense under EPA Code 1311. I added a second line. Drainage violations documented. Unauthorized discharge will be prosecuted. That night, someone tried to steal the sign. The cameras caught them. A man in a Lake Vista tennis hoodie with a crowbar. I forwarded the footage to the sheriff's office. They laughed when they saw it. Looks like trespassing and attempted vandalism. Want us to follow up? Absolutely. The HOA had overplayed their hand. They'd sued me, poisoned my water, lied to their residents, and now, because of pure arrogance, they'd triggered a chain of events that left them powerless. I wasn't just protecting my property anymore. I was holding them accountable for every inch of it. By the time the EPA fines were officially delivered to the Lake Vista Heights HOA, I'd already moved on to the next phase. There was no celebration, just action. I wasn't interested in theatrics. I was interested in control, legal, physical, and psychological. If they thought they could keep bullying their way to my lake, they were about to learn what happens when you try to fence in the man who built the water. Literally. I hired a contractor I trusted, a wiry guy named Russell who'd helped me install the original spillway years ago. No fuss, no talk, just results. We mapped out a perimeter fence, 6-foot cedar post barriers along the trailheads that cut into my property from the HOA side, reinforced steel mesh at the low points, and 4 motion-detecting cameras rigged up to solar panels and infrared sensors. All the warning signs were custom printed and laminated with reflective lettering. Private property, no HOA access. This is not a community resource. Trespassing enforced by local and federal statutes cameras operating 24/7. Violators will be recorded and reported. We even ran a seismic alert wire along the trail nearest the dam, sensitive enough to catch footsteps. It beeped every time a deer passed by, but I didn't mind. I liked knowing. The final piece was a gate, custom steel with a coded entry pad, built into the base of the original access trail the HOA used to stroll down like they owned the place. That gate didn't just close access, it closed the chapter. Meanwhile, I learned through a friend in county zoning that the HOA board was in full panic mode. They'd held an emergency meeting to clarify misunderstandings about the lake's ownership. That turned into a shouting match. Half the residents thought the board had lied to them. The other half couldn't believe the lake was never theirs to begin with. I got screenshots of the neighborhood Facebook group. Why weren't we told it was a private reservoir? Can we sue the board? Leslie should resign. We built our deck because of that lake view. What now? And my personal favorite, is it true the lake was man-made? That guy created it? Yes, that guy created it. And now that guy had fenced it off with legal steel and federal protection. That week, HOA President Leslie Marshall emailed me directly, her tone a curious blend of groveling and gaslighting. She claimed this was all a big misunderstanding, that maybe mistakes were made, and that she hoped we could find a way to de-escalate. She even threw in a suggestion. Perhaps you'd be open to allowing limited scenic access again. In good faith? I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to Stephanie, who advised me to let silence do the talking. Never negotiate with people who only want your assets, she said, especially when they're pretending it's reconciliation. The next day, a new sign went up at the shoreline. This is not your view. It wasn't meant to be poetic. It was a reminder, a cold, clean truth. By Friday, crews from the HOA began removing illegally built docks along their backyards. The county gave them 14 days to comply with shoreline restoration orders or face further fines. Residents stood in their backyards watching the planks come up, section by section, like the unbuilding of a lie they'd all agreed to believe. A few people tried to talk to me. One man offered beer and awkward apologies. A woman walked up holding a toddler and said she just wanted to show him the turtles. I didn't answer. I just pointed to the sign and the camera. They could hate me, pity me, fear me. I didn't care. I wasn't their neighbor. I was the man they trespassed against, the one who gave them a lake and got a lawsuit in return. I wasn't trying to be petty. I was drawing a line they should have seen years ago. By the end of the month, Lake Vista Heights was no longer a smug, pristine HOA community. It was a dysfunctional battleground with decaying docks, a dried-up lakefront, and neighbors who couldn't look each other in the eye without mentioning my name. And I wasn't even doing anything anymore. The place was unraveling on its own. Like a house built on moldy drywall, it just took one crack to start bringing everything down. The crack, in this case, came in the form of an anonymous leak. Someone, I suspect one of the fed-up residents, uploaded internal HOA documents to a public Facebook group for Georgia homeowners against overreach. Screenshots of HOA meeting notes, emails between board members, and even correspondence with their legal counsel were all there. All of it showed they'd known for years that the lake wasn't legally theirs, that the access agreement was limited and temporary, that they'd chosen to ignore it, hoping I'd either move away or cooperate indefinitely. My name was in those emails more than a dozen times. At one point, Leslie had written, "Mr. Jarrett is becoming increasingly territorial. It may be best to escalate pressure via signage or gate access restrictions. Residents shouldn't be made to feel they're intruding." I printed that one out and framed it, hung it in the garage next to my EPA compliance certificate. Public backlash was swift. Within a week, 5 families withdrew from the HOA, citing fraud, misrepresentation, and poor leadership. Local news caught wind of the story, and I woke up one morning to find a reporter standing near the closed trail filming in front of the "No Trespassing Federal Reservoir" sign. I didn't give them a statement, but I stood in the background with my coffee and let the sign speak for itself. Inside the HOA office, a small building they rented near the community entrance, panic turned into infighting. Leslie called an emergency board meeting to restore order and trust. According to a former board member who quit that day, it turned into a full-blown shouting match. Accusations flew that Leslie had withheld documents, that she misled homeowners, that she cost them access to the only real amenity they had. A man apparently stood up and yelled, "I bought this house for the lake, not for your lies." 2 board members resigned on the spot. That week, I received 3 separate notices from residents requesting private access to the lake, just to walk, just to fish, just for their kids. Some of the letters were sincere. One even included a hand-drawn apology from a 10-year-old girl named Abby who said she missed the turtles. I didn't have the heart to ignore that one. I wrote back with a simple message: "This lake is not for punishing children, but I will not reward the behavior of your HOA." It was the most civil I'd been in weeks, but the real hammer came when the developer filed for bankruptcy. Turns out the scandal had made it impossible to sell the last few lots. Investors pulled out. And with legal costs mounting from both the fines and internal lawsuits, the Lake Vista HOA lost its biggest financial backer. By the end of the quarter, the HOA was officially disbanded. Residents were now individually responsible for their own properties. Some cheered the freedom. Others panicked at the lack of central control. Leslie. She vanished from the neighborhood, her house dark and unsold, a foreclosure notice quietly appearing weeks later. The community that once tried to strong-arm me out of my own lake had collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance, and I didn't even need to drain it further. They drowned in paperwork, lies, and self-inflicted wounds. And still, every morning, I walked the ridge, still checked the dam, still fed the fish, because the lake remained. And I did too. The wind moves differently now across the water. It hits the surface with less resistance, less noise, like even the air has learned to hush itself around this place. What used to be the far end of Lake Vista, the edge they tried to claim, is just shoreline again, unmarked, quiet, and entirely mine. After the HOA dissolved, the neighborhood slid into what you might call polite awkwardness. The people who stayed, those who didn't sell or run, started waving again. Hesitant waves like you'd give a dog you once kicked but are now trying to befriend. I never waved back. Not because I hated them, but because I didn't want to play pretend. Some things can't be mended with small talk. A month after the dissolution, I filed the final paperwork with the county, a conversion declaration under Georgia's Private Conservation Act. Jarrett Lake was no longer a reservoir in the eyes of the state. It was a privately owned, federally registered ecological preserve with restricted human access. The process took 3 signatures, an environmental impact survey, and 1 meeting with a university herpetologist who got excited about our snapping turtle population. They now have research access. The HOA does not. I posted a new sign near the dam. Nothing flashy, just white letters on a wooden board. This lake exists because someone built it. Not for HOA, not for profit, but for balance. It's not poetic. It's not revenge. It's a reminder. One of the more persistent residents, a retiree named Malcolm who always wore golf shirts tucked in too tight, asked if I'd consider reopening the water for community weekends. Said it would rebuild goodwill. I looked him straight in the face and asked, "Do you know how many illegal drain pipes your lawn care company installed?" He blinked, opened his mouth, then walked away. Later, I got a letter from a local nonprofit asking if they could host occasional eco-education walks around the shoreline. I said yes. We set up a seasonal permit system, small groups, quiet hours, no motorized boats. In return, they helped me monitor the wildlife and test the water quality monthly. Balance, not noise. The lake's water level eventually stabilized, not quite back to where it was, but enough to give the herons a reason to return. The trout population bounced back faster than I expected. The trees stopped shedding early. Even the turtles seem less shy now. One morning, around mid-autumn, I found a single fishing bobber tangled in the reeds near the southern bank. Red and white plastic, the kind kids use. Could have been from years ago, but it looked too clean. I took it home and dropped it in a drawer. I'm not angry about it. It's just a small thing. A reminder that people will always try to sneak in. But now, they sneak with caution because they know this isn't their lake. This is my lake, and it always was.